Well, as many of you know, we've been going through the story. And the story is an opportunity for us to open up God's Word from a narrative, chronological reading and really get the big picture of what God is doing. It's not really a bunch of little stories as much as it's chapters within a much larger story. So just to kind of let you know, we do still have some of those books available, and if the demand is great enough, we will purchase even more. So far, I think we've purchased like 4 or 5 cases of the story, which is just blowing me out of the water how many people really want to engage in the story, be able to read it. How is that going for you? Anybody just really enjoying going through the story and reading it in this type of a format?
Yes.
Yeah? Good. Good. That's what I want to hear. If you think this is horrible, I would expect you probably not to be here. But I'm so glad that instead you've decided to join us as we journey through the story. Now, in order to really kind of capture where we are right now, which I mentioned before, we're in the book of Joshua, we really need to kind of go back and recapture what's led us to this point, especially after having missed last week. So we go back to the beginning in the book of Genesis, and we see God actually make creation. He makes everything. Sun, moon, stars, man, woman, animals, plants, everything out of nothing. Then God goes to a man, Abram, who is past childbearing years, his wife as well, and makes a child where there shouldn't be one, to deliver on a promise to Abram that his descendants would be as many as the stars in the sky, the sand on the shore. And then we see that God, through His providence, pulls Joseph, a young man, youngest out of his siblings, to be the leader. And in order to be the leader, he goes through a refining process. He leads them into slavery in Egypt, and continually Joseph rises to the top. He rises to the top in service of Potiphar. He rises to the top in the jail, and even amidst Pharaoh in himself. He's only second to him. And it's through that God provides food for the Israelites where there wasn't any. Now, what a coincidence that while the Israelites were traveling through the desert, that God provided food, manna, where there wasn't any. But even where they were experiencing this great freedom in Egypt, what was once going to provide for them all the sustenance that they needed whenever it was starving everywhere else, it led to slavery. So after 400 years, God is leading the Israelites out of Egypt towards His promised land that He had promised to Abraham years before that. Okay, one problem is the Israelites weren't so good at traveling. It's kind of like the kids whining on the car ride. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I don't have enough to eat. I don't have enough to drink. Can we stop at this store or that store? Maybe that's just your husband or wife. I don't know. But we're on this journey together, and God is trying to lead the Israelites to abandon the oppression of the past and to embrace all this promise of the future. But the promise of the future is scary. And since they're so scared and they're living in fear and timidity of what the future has in hold, they still want to run back and grab a hold of the past. Does that sound anything like your life? You know that there's got to be more. You know that God is calling you to so much more, but you're too scared to take the steps of faith, so you continue to run back to your past and to what you know. The Israelites wanted to do this time and time again, but God continued to provide for them when there was no hope of provision. Even amidst their whining and arguing. Remember, as they were leaving Egypt and the Egyptians were chasing them down. And they said, oh, we should have just died in Egypt. What's the whole point behind this? God parted the Red Sea. They crossed on dry land. You would think that they would get God is bigger than this problem that they're facing. He's bigger than their past. He's bigger than their oppression. He's bigger than their fears and their failures. But He's leading them through what seems like an immovable object, the Red Sea, and puts them on dry ground. Swallows up the Egyptian army. They get to a place in the desert and they go, oh great, we're going to die here. We don't have any water. The water is all bitter. Amazingly, they didn't have these water purifying pitchers at the time. You know, you can just run it through an RO system. But Moses comes up with this ingenious idea from God. Toss in a chunk of wood and the water will become drinkable. Who would have thought? A piece of wood was all it took. But God provided not just for a few Israelites, but for all of them. Probably talking millions of Israelites marching across the desert. I don't even know what they did for porta potties. But God was continually providing for them. When they came up to this opportunity that we missed out on last week, some of you may have caught it online. I did go ahead and record last week's message and put it out on YouTube. It's on Facebook. You can click on that link if you haven't already watched it. But they got to a point where they were about to enter into the promised land, and the people are grumbling and complaining because there's not enough water. God tells Moses to go speak to this rock, and it's just going to spew out water, and they're going to have enough. But Moses was pretty fed up at the time, and in his anger, he didn't really pass along the blessings of God. He didn't show God's power and authority in the whole thing, and instead of just speaking to the rock, he actually hit it a couple of times. God was still faithful. The water still came out. But through that, Moses wasn't allowed to go into the promised land. Even before that, God was wrestling with these stiff-necked people. That's what he called them. How many times am I going to provide for you? How many times am I going to deliver you? And you're still going to argue and complain, and you're still going to view me as too small to handle it all. But God is bigger than our problems. And we're going to see that as we journey on with Joshua. Because as we come to the end of Deuteronomy in chapter 30, we see some concluding statements of Moses. He says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15, "See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction." Okay, now I realize I'm no Vanna White here. I'm probably not going to ever be on Let's Make a Deal, but think about this deal that's being offered on behalf of Moses. Life and prosperity, death and destruction. Okay, it's not even a curtain gate. Okay, it's not like what's behind curtain number 3. Let's gamble and take our chances. But still, we're playing the odds a little bit. Because even though we say, I want life and prosperity, we continue to make choices based upon our past. That past that we're too afraid to leave because the future seems too big. We're still running back there. And so we're making all of our choices based upon death and destruction, hoping for an outcome of life and prosperity. Does that ever seem like a path that you're on? You say, God, I just want to choose life. I want to be there with you, for you. I want to do all these things. I want you to be my Savior. But yet in every moment of every day, we continue to make a choice that leads to death and destruction. We continue to fall into our old ruts and our old way of life, instead of allowing God to pull us up out of the ruts, to conquer our difficulties and to lead us home. And Moses could say, "For I command you today to love the Lord your God." That's number 1. You can mark that down. We kind of talked about that a little bit in the book of Mark, chapter 12. We did a series on it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You got to go all in. Love the Lord your God. Walk in obedience to Him. Okay, just a couple chapters back in the story, we talked about the commands that God had given through Moses. Okay, if you want to experience life, then you need to embrace the commands that God has given. When God says do this, we do it. When He says don't, we don't. It's not meant to tie us down, but it's actually meant to give us a greater freedom. A freedom that delivers us from past and into the future. A freedom that deals with the fear of letting go as well as the fear for advancing. So Moses says, love God, walk in obedience to Him, keep His commands, decrees, and laws. Then, that's as if to say, if you want to know what's going to come next, if you do this, let me tell you what the answer is going to be. Let me tell you what the natural effect of that's going to be. Okay, if you love God, if you embrace His commands, if you live according to His laws and decrees, then you will be able to increase and live and be blessed as you enter into this promised land. Okay, it's not, you know what? got up here on the front of the line, and he's saying, you know what, if you do what you want to do, if you go where you want to go, if you still hold on to your past and you still fail to embrace my commands, my law, my scripture now, I'm still going to provide for you. It's not what he says at all. Love God, and that comes in the form of obeying his commands. And when we obey his commands, then we get life. Then we get deliverance. Then we get hope and a promise of a better future. Okay, we can't expect to embrace that without a form of obedience. That doesn't negate God's grace. Because if it wasn't for God's grace, we wouldn't have the opportunity to fall in line with his law, to step in accordance to his scripture. So he's continually giving the Israelites rules to follow. If you just do this, I will give you life. If you just do this, I will deliver you from your enemies. If you just do this, I will give you the promised land. You see, in order for the Israelites to get out of Egypt, they had to cross this great body of water, the Red Sea. God parts the sea, and they're able to enter it in. Before they can enter into the promised land, they've also got another huge threshold to cross, the Jordan River. It was no small obstacle. They didn't have a bridge layer. God also parted the Jordan River so that they could cross over. But there were some things that the Israelites had to do. Okay, Joshua renewed this commitment with God. God, I know your laws are there, and I know that we need to follow them. Let's read them aloud. Let's get everybody on the same page. And then there's this one other thing. Remember with Abraham, there was this, we kind of signed a covenant. You remember that signature we had? This circumcision. So before you can enter into the promised land, before you can conquer these people, all the men in your army need to get circumcised. That slows up the advancement a little bit. But they're delivered on behalf of God. God is the one that parts the water and sends them through. We're still delivered by water. The water of the Holy Spirit. The water representing baptism. Okay, it's still by God's efforts. Okay, we can cut away as much flesh as we want, but it's still God who blesses the efforts as we advance. We can see throughout this story of Joshua, God's command and his law upon him. Matter of fact, just turning a page in Deuteronomy to chapter 31 here, it says in verse 7, Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, Be strong and courageous. You must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them. You must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. You see, Moses is passing the torch to Joshua. Joshua was one of the 12 spies that went into the land of Canaan to look at the promised land. It was Joshua and Caleb that were saying, you know what, let's go, let's do this. God is bigger. He's promised us this, we can do it. It was the other 10 that said, oh, these people are too many, they're too big, we can't do this. They started up a riot with the rest of the Israelites. That led to them wandering in the desert for another 40 years. But Joshua is getting the mantle. And Moses is saying to Joshua, be strong and courageous. It's echoed time and time and time again in the book of Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Now get this. He's got some jobs to do. You must go with the people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors. You must divide it among them as their inheritance. But understand this. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. We go back to the book of Genesis. Remember, God's desire is to be with us. That when he created man and woman in the garden, God was walking amongst them. And it was when our sin came into being that God separated us from him. There is a definite separation. But that whole time that we've been enduring this punishment, God has been pursuing us. He is pursuing. So all of these things we talked about, that God drew up Abraham and gave him a son at an old age, that was God pursuing man. When God drew Joseph away from his brothers and into slavery in Egypt, God was pursuing us. When God was drawing out the Israelites from Egypt, He was pursuing us. And now as He's about to engage them in the promised land, He's continually pursuing. He's leading the Israelites, remember, by a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. He's given them the tabernacle, a place that's kind of his physical dwelling, so to speak, that they can earmark. This is where God is at. God is with us. And so they knew that. And here again, be strong and courageous. Not because, Joshua, you're a great military victor. Not because you've trained really hard. Not because you're the biggest and the best. But because God will go before you and God will be with you. That should give us all courage. That should give us all courage to leave the past and to advance to the future God is calling us. He says, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. God is with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. This also kind of goes in condition with what Moses had said. Obey the law, and then you will have life. You'll be able to experience the blessings of this land. If we live in obedience to God, God will be with us. He will march with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. Do not be afraid, and do not be discouraged. Then we get to the book of Joshua. This is so amazing because we see what Moses has said to Joshua in order to pass the torch so the Israelites would see that physically Moses wasn't going to be in charge anymore. Now Joshua is. And then God's got some words for Joshua. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all the people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. How's that for a commissioning statement? It's one thing for the leader of the group of people to stand before all the other people and say, okay, Joshua, it's your turn. I'm giving you the keys. Okay, be strong and courageous. Don't lose heart. Don't become discouraged. God is with you. He will lead you. He will never leave you or forsake you. And then Moses is gone and Joshua goes, snap. What am I going to do now? I've always been following Moses. All I know is Moses. And then God speaks to Joshua. Joshua, be strong and courageous. Joshua, you're not just going to go with these people, you're going to lead these people. Joshua, every place you step foot is going to be yours. I will give you the victory. I was with Moses. You saw that. I'm going to be with you. Be strong and courageous. Don't lose heart. Don't give in. Don't give up. Don't let up. March on. I will give you the victory. Joshua has just been given the commanding orders from God. And so he has a job to do. It's not an easy job. You remember that 40 years before, when Moses was trying to lead the parents into the promised land, they were scared. They saw the obstacles before them as too large to overcome. And they complained and they bickered and they tucked their tail and they ran. And God punished them for that. That generation has now died off. And a new generation has risen, and Joshua is trying to lead them into the promised land again. Okay, it's the same promised land. It's still a land flowing with milk and honey. It's still got large amounts of produce. The land is very fertile, and the people are still many, and they're still large. And the first obstacle that they face is this town, Jericho. Jericho has this fortified wall all the way around it. So they've already crossed the Jordan. God did that. They already signed the covenant with God, circumcision. They did that. God witnessed that. Now, God lays out a plan. Joshua chapter 6. This is kind of an interesting plan, to say the least. We can see in Joshua chapter 6, verse 2, Then the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands. Well, wait a second here. God, we haven't even fought the battle yet. We haven't even advanced against the enemy. I have delivered. Maybe my English or my grammar is a little rough, but that sounds like past tense. I have already done it. How much different would our life be when we faced obstacles if we understood that God is right there beside us saying, don't worry about it, I've already done it. I've already taken care of it. You simply need to walk in obedience to me. If you do what I tell you to do, I have already conquered it. If you want to do what you want to do, what makes you happy, you're going to fail miserably, just like your ancestors. But I've already done this. Okay, God, I get it. You've already done it. You've already provided the victory. Now God says, this is how you're going to do it now. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpet. And when you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. Joshua had to have courage. And there's a very fine line between courage and stupidity. I mean, we see it all around us. When somebody makes a valiant effort, when the coach decides to go for the 2-point conversion on the last play of the game to win it instead of to tie it and send it to overtime, when he makes it, we go, yes, that took so much courage. And when he misses it, we go, how stupid was that? We do it in our life as well. The people who go above and beyond the odds to accomplish great things, we lift them up on pedestals. We give them holidays. And the people that fail miserably at taking a chance, we write off as an idiot. What were they thinking? They were absolutely insane. I would have to say it borders on insanity. To take the army of Israel into the land of giants, to approach a stone wall with an ark that's carrying the 10 Commandments, carried by Levites, who in front of them had priests with trumpets made of ram's horns, who had some guards on either end of them walking around this wall. How crazy is that? How insane of an idea that God is going to deliver this city to the Israelites by simply walking around. And did I mention that their source of intelligence for this whole operation was a prostitute living inside the wall? Rahab. Of all the people to get their information from was Rahab. But as they went into the city to check it out, and Rahab delivered the news and she provided protection for the spies, she said, our people fear you. They've seen what God has done. We've heard the message, and these people are scared. And whenever your opponent's scared, that gives you a little bit extra courage. Just to know that they're trembling a little bit in what they think you might be able to accomplish. But still, trumpets? One time around the wall. 6 days in a row. It would have been interesting to get a sneak peek inside the walls of Jericho. What are the people inside thinking? I mean, they could be thinking, these guys are morons. What are they doing walking around the walls? What's that going to accomplish? Woohoo! Keep it up, guys. You know, hey, we're going to be here all year. Keep coming back. Walk around the walls. My thinking is that God was working a spirit of fear and trembling inside of them. And every time that they walked around those walls, it was like a big bad bully was coming to pick on them. And inside they're going, when's it gonna happen? When's it all gonna break loose? When are these people gonna get us? They're just trying to rile us up a little bit. Seventh day. March around 7 times. Blow the trumpets. Let out a big scream. The walls come tumbling down. Now let me tell you what the difference is between the insanity and the courage here. God was bigger than the wall. God was bigger than the wall. We can put up as many walls as we want. We can make them as thick as we want, as deep as we want, as wide as we want. God is still bigger than the walls. God wanted to prove to the Israelites as they were marching into this promised land, this is not your effort. The battle belongs to the Lord. No matter what you do, no matter how you train, the battle belongs to me. I promised it, I'm going to deliver it. I'm going to go with you. I will fight on your behalf. And he did. But we can see through the book of Joshua, time and time again, these battles being played out. The first one was Jericho. Joshua listened, and the people won. They go to Ai. And there's some disobedience behind this, and they lose. They regroup. They listen to God. They go back against Ai, and they win. There's a group of people from Gibeon that make this declaration that they're going to sign a treaty, and the Israelites forget to consult God. And so they sign this treaty. It was a mistake. They shouldn't have done it. God would have said no. And so in essence, even though they didn't fight the battle, they lost. Then there was a group of Amalekites, or Ammonites rather. All these names get all confusing. Ammonites, all the kings were gathering together, and they were going to march against Israel because they heard how Jericho fell, and they weren't about to fall, so they joined forces and they go against Israel. God fights for the Israelites, and they all go down. Then there's a group of kings from the north. They all get together, and they fight against Israel, and they all go down. So in the book of Joshua, we see all the enemies inside of what would be the Gaza Strip all just go down because God is bigger than they are. Now you would think that that's amazing, but it doesn't just stop there. There's like a respite of activity. God actually promises them much more land. If you go back to the beginning of this, all of this land over to the Euphrates, there's a huge amount of promised land. But they fail to walk in obedience. They fail to step out in faith and instead live by fear. And instead of driving out all of the hostility that exists in that area, all the people who were against God, instead of driving them out and putting them to death, they allow them to live. And when they allow them to live, they become a thorn on their side. And that's where we get the whole story of Judges. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. All these people are causing problems that they've allowed to live. The Israelites are following, and then they fall away. We talked about it in the series Adrift back in September. But with Joshua, we need to understand some very important things here. Number one is, you've got some battles to fight. Okay? The first battle, I believe, is the battle over your past. The battle over your peers. The battle over what you've always done, where you've always been, what you've been taught and told. Okay? All of these things are in your past. And you want to hang on to them. The one problem is, in order to claim what God has for you in your future, you have to let go of the traditions of the past. You have to be able to let go of the people, the friends, the family members of your past that are actually pulling you in a different direction than where God is calling you. That's not easy. That's not easy. We can see it in the New Testament as God, through Jesus, is calling people to follow Him. And He says, you know what, you can't take care of your family and be with me. You've got to leave your family behind. That doesn't mean they're of no importance. That means that God has the greatest priority. If your family or your friends are standing in opposition to what God has called us, and we know that because we live and we walk obedient to His Word. If they're living contrary to that, we have to let go of that so that we can claim so much more. In order to claim life, we have to let go of death. Does that make sense? And that's a huge, huge battle. It's a huge, huge battle for many of us because our friends live in the past. Our comfort zone is in the past. Sometimes our family is in the past. And we don't want to let go. We don't want to break relationships. We don't want to move on because it's too scary. The people who live in the land are too big. The obstacles, the walls are too huge in front of us. And so we want to go to the comfort of the past. As soon as we hit the obstacles along the journey, the Israelites going through the desert, as soon as we hit the obstacles, we say, oh, it was so much better in the past. But the Israelites forgot that they were slaves. The Israelites forgot that they were oppressed, that they were abused. Sometimes we do the same thing. We forget just how much the past beats us up. We forget just how much the past makes us unhappy, how much it leaves us depressed. But because we're so afraid to advance to the future, we get stuck in the past. So the first battle that we face is the past. I think the second battle we face is ourself. We face a battle of ourself. Our self is continually at war here. I pulled up just a few ideas here that I think that we can pull from the Israelites. Number one, inside of self is doubt. Remember Moses when God was calling him from the burning bush? I can't do that. How many times do we tell God, I can't do that? God, that's just simply too big. That's too much. I can't do it. I'm not equipped to do that. But if God is going to call you, He's going to equip you. The second thing is this, disillusionment. It was better in Egypt. It was better in Egypt. The Red Sea is too big. The army is too huge. The water is too bitter. It's better in Egypt. Disobedience. Moses faced this one. The Israelites faced it. It was that whole rock thing. And the Israelites are like, can't we just have water? We're all going to starve. We're going to die right here in the desert. And so they would choose to be disobedient instead of faithful. Moses, the same hand, he was getting frustrated, irritated, and he was disobedient to the commands of God. Discouragement. Discouragement. The inhabitants are too many. They're too large. I can't do it. The obstacles before me are just simply too much. And so within ourselves, we battle these doubts, these fears, these insecurities. We battle our shame and our guilt over our past. And because we're hanging on to all of those things within us, we're not allowed to experience the greater freedom that God has given us. Remember what He said? I will be with you. I will be with you. You know how the Israelites were going to advance against all these enemies, these giants in the future? They were going to remember the promises of the past. God said, I'm going to deliver you into the promised land. He's about to do that. He told Abraham, I'm going to give you a son. He did that. He told Joseph, I'm going to make your brothers bow down to you. He did that. He told Moses, I'm going to take you to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, away from Pharaoh. He did that. He crossed the Red Sea. He delivered them manna in the desert when there was no hope of food. If you look in the past, instead of being held down by it, look a little closer at all the times that God was there. Look at all the times that God provided deliverance, that all the times that God provided hope, that all the times that God was there. And when He said, I'll never leave you or forsake you, He means it. He meant it then, He means it now. But there's something that we have to do. Remember what Moses said? Love God. Obey His commands. He says the same thing to Joshua. You're about to enter into this promised land. These obstacles are going to be huge. I'm bigger. Obey me. I'll be with you. We're going to take them down. Battle number one is the past. Battle number two is the present with ourselves. Battle number three is the future. Sometimes the future seems too big. Too unimaginable. And we're afraid to go there. But I think God is calling us to just that. God is calling us to step out in faith and to experience something we've never experienced before. The Israelites, as they're crossing through the wilderness, have never experienced the promised land. Abraham got to see it. Abraham's children got to see it. The spies went in to see it. Moses got to see it from a distance. The Israelites had never seen this before. They've never seen these people until they come into battle with them. It takes a huge step of faith to cross that river and enter into battle. And when we want to enter into battle, there's a whole lot of people holding us back. First in line holding us back is yourself. I can't do it. I'm not big enough, not strong enough, not well educated enough. I don't know the Bible. I don't know what all this church stuff is. I don't even know how to survive day to day in my life, in my marriage, in my job. I'm struggling, I'm hurt, I'm depressed. How am I ever going to claim all that God wants from me when I can't manage right now? Many times what God is telling us is, forget the past. Cling to my law. It gives life and it gives hope for the future. And if you can stop doing what you've always done and start doing what I'm telling you to do, the consequences, the outcome is going to be so much bigger, so much better than anything you could have ever imagined. It's going to be a promised land for you. And I will be with you. I will never leave you or forsake you. As I've always been, I always will be. So what are your walls? What are your walls? How big are they? Are you measuring the size of your wall or the size of your God? Are you bending your knees? Are they trembling in fear of what might be, what you can't accomplish, what you can't do, what everybody else is telling you that is impossible? My Bible says all things are possible with God. He will never leave me or forsake me. He wants to be with me. And if I obey Him, He will be with me. He'll help me conquer. The times where I get in trouble are the times that I try to do it myself. How about you? I can look back in my life and time after time after time and go, I messed up. I messed up. In the future, when things don't go right, I guarantee you I can point the finger back at myself and go, I messed that one up. My bad. God is for me. Who can be against me? Are you ready to take on those insurmountable odds? Are you ready to enter into a promised land that is bigger than anything you can imagine? That's better than all that you can participate in? Because if you are, I got to tell you, the battle begins now.